Greetings, Radiant Leo. Let me ask you something bold. What if your silence has become the most powerful thing about you? Welcome to Eternal Mindfulness, your sacred space for deeper cosmic insight, where astrology meets intuition, and every message is designed to reconnect you with your truest self. This isn't just a horoscope video. It's a moment of divine timing. And if you've landed here today, it's not by accident. You were guided. Something within you has shifted. Maybe you don't fully realize it yet, but the version of you that once waited for others to apologize, to change, or to see your worth, that version no longer exists. You didn't come here for permission. You came for confirmation of what your soul already knows. You've evolved. And you did it not through noise or confrontation, but through stillness. Through choosing peace over proving a point. Through walking away with grace rather than clinging with fear. That's what makes you dangerous now. Not in a threatening way, but in the way that unnerves those who once underestimated you. Because people don't fear loud power. They fear quiet certainty. And Leo, your fire hasn't gone out. It's just grown focused, controlled, centered, magnetic. Maybe you're watching this from your car, curled up in your favorite spot at home, or in the quiet of a late night moment. Wherever you are, take a deep breath. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Because what's unfolding now is your return. But this time, you're not returning to who you were. You're rising as someone unshakable. Before we go deeper, comment an angel number you've been seeing lately: 111, 444, 888, whatever keeps showing up in your life. These numbers aren't random. They're your activation codes from the universe. Let me also take a moment to thank you from the deepest place in my heart for being here. Every like, every comment, every subscription brings you closer to the family we're building here at Eternal Mindfulness. Your energy keeps this channel alive. Your support allows us to share these life-shifting messages with more beautiful souls like you. So thank you, sincerely. And trust me, beloved Leo, you're going to want to stay with me until the end of this video. Because what the universe is revealing today is nothing short of breathtaking. It's not just a forecast. It's a doorway. And if you choose to walk through it, you won't just hear words, you'll feel something in your spirit click into place. So ask yourself, what part of me has grown so quietly, so deeply, that even I didn't notice it at first? Because today, we're not talking about becoming someone new. We're talking about finally returning to the version of yourself that never needed fixing, just needed permission to rise. Let's begin. Sometimes, the most profound shift doesn't arrive with a roar, it arrives in silence. It arrives in that subtle, almost invisible moment when you no longer feel the need to defend your worth, to explain your pain, or to fix what someone else broke. For Leo, a sign so often associated with boldness and radiant expression, this kind of quiet strength may seem counterintuitive. But in truth, it is the highest evolution of your power. The sun, your ruling planet, doesn't scream to be seen. It simply rises. Every day, without needing permission, without waiting for applause. And that's the exact energy you're beginning to embody now. You're learning that your light doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be protected, honored, and directed inward before it shines outward again. There was a time when you gave endlessly, hoping your loyalty, your consistency, your fire would be enough to inspire change in others. But the lesson unfolding now isn't about waiting for that change, it's about becoming the change that no longer waits. This is not about walking away out of bitterness, but about stepping forward with clarity. It's a sacred act of self-respect when you choose not to carry what was never yours to hold. And rather than trying to drag others into awareness, you're choosing to meet your own, with compassion. There's a kind of softness here that doesn't make you weak. It makes you whole. Like a lion who no longer hunts for validation but rests in its own presence, you're no longer looking outside for what must be claimed within. The cosmic influence of this moment invites you inward, like the still lake reflecting the sky without effort. You may find that your need to prove yourself has started to dissolve. This is not resignation, it's revelation. There's wisdom in pausing, in refusing to react. There is power in restraint, not because you're suppressing emotion, but because you've come to understand that not everything requires your energy. The real strength is in discernment, choosing what is truly worthy of your attention, and what no longer resonates with the frequency of your peace. Just like breath naturally returns to stillness after movement, you're learning to return to center. Not to hide, but to realign. To reclaim your energy from people and situations that once left you drained. You begin to realize, it was never about being loud enough to be heard, it was about hearing yourself again. And perhaps for the first time in a long time, your heart is no longer screaming for someone to stay. It's whispering something different, I'm ready to be whole, with or without anyone else. In the quietest corners of your being, there is now space. Space for grace, for healing, for expansion. You're not waiting anymore. You're not pushing against closed doors or sending signals into voids. You're not standing in the storm hoping it'll pass, you're stepping out of it entirely. And in doing so, you become a storm of your own. But this time, it's not chaos. It's clarity. Like a mountain unmoved by passing clouds, you stand. You observe. And you choose. What you're stepping into is not a performance of strength, it's the embodiment of it. The world may not understand this version of you yet. And that's okay. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be aligned with yourself. So, if a part of you has felt the weight finally lifting, if you've noticed your silence becoming louder than your words ever were, then trust that. Trust the stillness. Trust the detachment. Trust the way your energy is beginning to shift, because it's not the end of something broken. It's the beginning of something beautifully unshakable. There comes a quiet point on the path where you no longer crave validation, where you stop checking if someone finally sees your worth, or if the world is ready to offer what you once begged for. Not because you've become cold or indifferent, but because something deeper has shifted, the longing itself has dissolved. The center of gravity has moved inward. Instead of looking for peace in someone else's arms, or anchoring your calm in someone else's presence, you've begun to build a home within yourself. And that home, that inner sanctuary, doesn't depend on outside conditions. It holds firm through all seasons. This isn't a passive withdrawal, it's an active returning. Returning to your own breath. To your own needs. To your own sense of timing. What once felt like loneliness now feels like space. What once looked like detachment is now clarity. And slowly, you realize that being at peace was never about eliminating conflict from your life, but about no longer allowing external chaos to disturb your internal stillness. Astrologically, Leo is ruled by the sun, the center of our solar system, the giver of light, life, and warmth. But the sun never chases. It simply shines. This cosmic principle mirrors the transformation you're experiencing now. You're no longer orbiting around people, situations, or outcomes to feel secure. You've become the source. You no longer absorb energy, you emit it. You no longer react, you respond. And that subtle but sacred shift is everything. It's said that the deepest stillness isn't found by silencing the world around you, but by becoming so still within that the world's noise no longer pulls you off center. That kind of peace isn't flashy. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be proven. But it changes everything. When you stop grasping, stop forcing, stop fighting to be seen or loved in a certain way, you don't become invisible. You become magnetic. The law of attraction doesn't respond to desperation, it responds to coherence, to authenticity, to balance. This is the power of allowing rather than chasing. When you are grounded in yourself, in your truth, in your quiet rituals of self-connection, you no longer negotiate your values to gain approval. You no longer distort yourself to fit a mold that was never made for you. That's when you start to radiate, not as a performance, but as a natural state of being. And from that place, the right things begin to move toward you. Not because you're demanding them, but because you've become the frequency they were waiting for. It's a lesson often learned through discomfort. Through disappointments that stripped away the illusions. Through the ache of realizing someone couldn't meet you at the level of honesty or consistency you offered. But now, in the afterglow of that clarity, you stand differently. Softer in some ways, but stronger in the ones that matter. You trust your pace. You respect your rhythm. You know that whatever is real doesn't require chasing. It remains. It roots. It returns. Like the quiet growth of a seed beneath the earth, your healing may not always be visible, but it is constant. And every small act you do to nurture your well-being, a walk, a breath, a boundary, a kind thought toward yourself, becomes part of that rebuilding. Not of the old world that broke you, but of a new world that holds you. A life not defined by what you lost, but by the peace you now protect. So ask yourself today, what am I doing, even in the smallest way, to tend to my inner garden? What daily ritual is helping me become more of myself, not for applause, but for wholeness? Because these are the seeds. And this is how a new life begins. What once felt like loyalty may now feel like weight. You held on, not out of weakness, but from a place of devotion, a belief that consistency, patience, and enduring love could somehow soften what was unsteady around you. But slowly, quietly, that belief has unraveled, not through bitterness, but through clarity. You no longer confuse waiting with love, nor do you mistake enduring with strength. There comes a point on the journey when staying becomes heavier than leaving, and that point, for you, has quietly arrived. You see, people often associate strength with staying power, with the ability to hold still through chaos, to forgive endlessly, to carry burdens that were never yours to begin with. But true strength evolves. And you've reached a moment where strength is no longer about carrying more, it's about releasing. It's not about being the unshakable foundation for everyone else, it's about being the calm center within yourself. This is a shift that others may not understand, especially those who once relied on your silence, your steadiness, or your willingness to bend. But understanding isn't the requirement for your growth. Respecting your own boundaries is. In astrology, Leo's heart energy is fierce and generous, willing to pour love, loyalty, and light into those it believes in. But there's a sacred turning point when the fire no longer seeks to warm others who offer only shadows in return. That turning point is what you're walking through now. And although it may feel unfamiliar, even lonely at times, it is leading you to something far more powerful than belonging. It is leading you to self-honor. This stage of your evolution is not about proving that you were right or getting others to finally see your worth. It's about realizing you no longer need to be seen in the same way. You're not here to carry guilt for leaving, or to explain why you no longer feel safe standing in spaces that once felt like home. Freedom begins the moment you accept that no one has to validate your decision to let go. And the irony is, those who once took your presence for granted often only recognize your value when it's absent. But by then, your peace has already taken root elsewhere, within. The Strength card in tarot doesn't just signify endurance. It speaks of quiet resilience. It speaks of a heart that no longer roars for attention but beats with steady knowing. You're not choosing to walk away to teach anyone a lesson. You're walking away because the lesson was already learned, in the stillness, in the waiting, in the aching truth that self-abandonment is never the price of love. You are no longer trading your silence for someone else's comfort. You are no longer shrinking to stay welcome in rooms that asked you to lower your standards to belong. Even the most patient hearts reach a threshold. And that threshold becomes a doorway. Not one of escape, but of return. Return to your rhythm. Return to the kind of love that doesn't demand your sacrifice to survive. The kind of connection that holds you not because you fought to be kept, but because you are free to be seen in your entirety. That is the true meaning of liberation. So ask yourself gently, what are you still holding on to, not because it brings you joy, but because you once believed it might? And what might happen if you loosened your grip, just a little? Could it be that freedom, the real kind, is already waiting in that space just beyond your need to be understood? Let it go, not out of defeat, but out of deep, reverent respect for the person you're becoming. Not because they were wrong, but because you are finally right with yourself. Forgiveness often arrives not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet moment of release, the moment you decide to stop carrying what was never truly yours to hold. It doesn't mean the pain was justified, nor does it mean the other person was right. It simply means you've reached a point where your peace has become more important than your past. You're no longer waiting for an apology, because the power of your healing has already moved you beyond the need for it. In the journey of Leo, pride is often misunderstood. People assume it's loud or self-centered, but real pride, the kind you're embodying now, is rooted in deep self-respect. And this is exactly what you're stepping into, a form of forgiveness that doesn't require an audience, an explanation, or a reaction. You forgive because you no longer want to be tied to the weight of what happened. You forgive because you are ready to breathe easier. This kind of forgiveness doesn't erase what occurred. It doesn't minimize the lessons. It honors them. It says, I've learned enough now. I've heard enough now. And I choose to move forward, not because it was okay, but because I no longer wish to be defined by the wound. This is where true clarity begins. When you no longer need closure from someone else, you create your own. You decide that peace is not something that must be given to you. It is something you give to yourself. From an energetic standpoint, holding resentment or waiting for someone to make things right keeps you in a constant state of imbalance. Your nervous system, your thoughts, your emotional field, they stay entangled with the past. And every time you revisit the memory, expecting it to be different, you're investing your life force into something that cannot be changed. But the moment you choose to let go, truly let go, you begin to reroute that energy back into your present. And what you'll notice is that clarity begins to take root where confusion once lived. Light begins to settle where heaviness once sat. Leo's nature is deeply connected to the heart, and the heart, when wounded, tends to either close off or overextend. But forgiveness is the space in between. It's not about guarding yourself from feeling again, and it's not about rushing to reconcile. It's about neutralizing the charge, coming back into emotional balance, and saying to yourself, I deserve to feel light again. That's the real reward. Not the change in the other person, but the transformation within you. One of the most compassionate acts you can offer yourself is to stop waiting. Stop waiting for recognition. Stop waiting for someone to understand why you hurt. Stop waiting for the perfect ending that will never come in the way you imagined. Because you're not standing in that same place anymore. You've grown. You've outgrown the need to explain. And more importantly, you've outgrown the illusion that healing requires their participation. When you look at the situation from a greater perspective, you might even realize that what hurt you most also brought you the greatest clarity. That what broke you open also became the doorway back to yourself. And in that awareness, there is something quietly liberating. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because your nervous system does. Because your breath does. Because your future self is waiting to meet you, unburdened. So if you feel ready, even in the smallest way, write a sentence of forgiveness not meant for them, but for you. Let it be simple. Let it be gentle. Something like, I release you so I can return to myself. You don't need to send it. You don't need to explain it. You just need to feel it. And in that small act of surrender, you reclaim your freedom, one breath at a time. The moment you stop reaching outward for reassurance, something extraordinary begins to unfold within you. Without the noise of external approval or the need to be seen through someone else's eyes, you start noticing the subtle but powerful presence of your own inner knowing. There's a shift, gentle at first, where your center of gravity returns to where it's always belonged, within. You are no longer held together by praise or validation. Instead, you are held together by awareness, by presence, by the quiet understanding that who you are, in this exact moment, is enough. This is where true strength begins. Not in resistance, not in control, but in the release of seeking. When you stop looking for someone to walk beside you in order to feel steady, you realize that your own stride has rhythm. It has memory. It knows how to carry you, through loss, through silence, through uncertainty. What once felt like loneliness becomes sacred space. What once felt like absence becomes clarity. You start to understand that peace isn't something you find in a person. It's something you become when you stop needing anything else to complete you. From an astrological perspective, Leo's journey is deeply tied to self-expression, the heart center, and creative identity. But expression without grounding can become performance. And that's what you've transcended. You are no longer performing to be accepted. You are creating from a place of inner stability. That's why your energy has changed, because it's no longer reactive, it's responsive. It's no longer fragile, it's embodied. Even the numbers this week echo your inner work. 6 represents the harmony and healing you've been nurturing after emotional imbalance. 17 speaks of rising, of the kind of renewal that comes after you've allowed everything false to fall away. 9 closes the loop. It's the release. It's the gentle bow you take at the end of one version of your life before stepping through the door of a new one. These numbers are not arbitrary. They mirror your internal landscape, the cycles you've walked through, the awakenings you've faced alone, and the decisions you now make with quiet certainty. Colors hold energy, too. Earth tones like bronze and warm brown aren't just grounding, they remind you that your foundation is stable, rich, and worthy of trust. These tones don't shout. They don't demand attention. They simply support. Just like you do now, for yourself. Your body, your spirit, your boundaries, they are no longer fragile spaces to defend. They are sacred spaces to inhabit. And because you've chosen to stay present with yourself, you become the one who can offer the kind of love you once sought from others. The journey of no longer needing to prove yourself is perhaps one of the most freeing experiences of all. It doesn't mean you stop growing. It doesn't mean you stop connecting. It means you've stopped negotiating your peace in order to be chosen. You've stopped sacrificing your authenticity to keep the peace. You've stopped asking for someone else to give you what your own heart has always been capable of holding. You walk differently now. Not because you've hardened, but because you've softened into yourself. You've become less dependent on how others receive you, and more devoted to how you meet yourself in each moment. And that devotion is magnetic. It attracts not attention, but alignment. Not admiration, but resonance. So if you find yourself breathing a little easier, standing a little taller, and needing a little less from anyone else, that's not emptiness. That's arrival. If this is the season you're in, take a breath and affirm it to yourself. Write it down. Speak it softly, I don't need to prove anything. I just need peace. Because that kind of self-assurance doesn't just protect you, it opens you. And when you're open, not for attention, but for alignment, life meets you differently. It flows, it responds, and most importantly, it reflects the unshakable strength you've cultivated, not because you were given it, but because you remembered it was yours all along. You no longer need to be seen to feel worthy. You've outgrown the space where applause dictated your confidence or where someone else's silence made you question your light. Now, you are the light. And it doesn't flicker when it isn't reflected back, it radiates because it knows its source is within. There's a quiet power that lives in you now. One that doesn't seek revenge, or recognition, or even reconciliation. It's a power that comes from release, from no longer needing the closure that may never come, and no longer waiting for the understanding that may never arrive. Because the most profound clarity you've gained on this journey wasn't about them. It was about you. About your choice to step out of the narrative where you had to prove your value, and into the reality where your value simply is. If you've listened this far, that alone tells me something sacred about where you are in your journey. You are no longer driven by fear. You are no longer confused by absence. You're no longer trying to fix what never really held you. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to realize that what once felt like rejection was really redirection, not away from love, but back toward yourself. So now I ask you, what will you do with this new space you've created inside? How will you nourish it? Will you choose peace, even when noise calls you back into old patterns? Will you choose softness, even when your pride tempts you to harden? Will you allow yourself to be seen by the only one who truly needs to witness your growth, you? You don't need to write a perfect ending to your past to begin a beautiful chapter in your present. You don't need a big, dramatic transformation. You just need honesty. Consistency. Small acts of devotion to your inner world. That's where real change lives, not in grand gestures, but in the moment you choose not to shrink, not to chase, not to explain. The moment you decide, gently but firmly, that your peace is non-negotiable. If you're feeling this shift, I invite you to ground it with one small act. Share in the comments one thing, just one, that you've done recently to come home to yourself. Or if words feel too much, type, I have returned to myself. That's it. No need to justify it. Just let it be your declaration, your breath, your truth. And from my heart to yours, thank you. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for every like, every comment, every moment of presence you've offered to eternal mindfulness. Your energy here isn't just appreciated, it's essential. Because every time you show up for yourself, you help this space grow into a mirror of healing for others, too. So if today's message reached you in some way, if it stirred something soft, or steady, or brave inside you, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this with someone who might need to hear it too. You never know how far one ripple of healing can reach. We'll meet again soon, somewhere between stillness and fire, the place where a Leo rises. Not louder, not smaller, just whole.